cluster in Melbourne sparked by a different, more infectious strain of the virus. The government pushes for mandatory vaccines for aged care workers pending further health advice. Environment groups prepare legal action against the operators of a burning chemical ship sinking off Sri Lanka. And a fitting win, this portrait of a centenarian takes out the 100th Archibald Prize. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. There's been a disturbing new twist in Victoria's coronavirus outbreak. For the first time, the Indian strain known as the Delta variant has been detected in the community. The state has recorded 4 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the outbreak to 64. But it's what genomic testing has found that has health experts most concerned. A number of cases called the West Melbourne cluster have been infected with the Delta strain, which is even more infectious than what's been seen in this outbreak so far.
A new front has opened up in Melbourne's battle with COVID-19. This primary school is one of the main targets.
We've got disturbing news overnight.
The Delta strain of the Indian variant that's savaging South Asia has been found in Melbourne. Genomic testing shows a West Melbourne family of 4 have it. One is a grade 5 student at North Melbourne Primary School who was believed to have passed it on to a classmate. That child's parents now have the virus, representing 3 of today's new cases. A 4th new case was already in isolation and is a primary contact of the Port Melbourne cluster. Jervis Bay, New South Wales is an area of concern. The family spent 5 days there from May 19 before returning to Melbourne.
We do need to understand where it's come from, and that means that there are unidentified upstream cases. Whether they are in Victoria or elsewhere is to be determined.
In Victoria, 10 people have been able to quarantine at home or in hospital in the last 2 months, but all have tested negative. There's also other possible leads.
You might remember the gentleman from New South Wales, probably about 6 weeks ago now. That was the Delta variant.
There are more than 300 close contacts linked to North Melbourne Primary School. 70% have come back negative so far. Does this Delta variant set us back?
Oh no, I think we review as we always have, based on what else emerges.
Last night, 2 of the so-called fleeting transmissions were reclassified as negative. One of those caused businesses to shut in Anglesea.
There was a sense of anger amongst the business community. Their costs that they've incurred should be 100% compensated.
Surely Victorians deserve some easing of restrictions in line with that. Instead, we've got business as usual.
We did not make a decision about where we were with the entire outbreak based on these 2 cases alone.
There are still 8 cases of transmission between unknown parties, but the outlook is sunnier with new cases already in isolation.
I think we're in a really good position now. 0 numbers outside of quarantine. That's what we're hoping for.
I think it depends on the next few days as to whether these 2 families have caused new chains of transmission.
The messaging about how contagious this virus is and the rationale for the lockdown has been a bit confusing for some this week, with authorities accused of scaremongering, a charge it denies. There's also growing frustration about this 4th lockdown and why Melbourne is here once again. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
Authorities are now trying to work out how this new strain of virus made it into the community. Known as Delta, it's still being researched, but it's believed to be more transmissible and might contribute to more serious illness than other variants. Casey Briggs explains.
It's not the news that Melbourne wanted as it now enters a 2nd week locked down. This outbreak, thought to have been seeded by 1 hotel quarantine escape, turns out to have a 2nd seed. And this one is a strain different to the one that everyone else in the state has. It's the Delta variant, first identified in India. It's one of 2 variants being watched that originated there. The other one is called Kappa, but Delta is regarded as the bigger threat. It's been designated a variant of concern by the WHO. It's more transmissible than the Alpha variant, first found in the United Kingdom, and the evidence from England suggests there's a small drop in vaccine effectiveness, especially for someone who's only had 1 dose. The Delta strain of coronavirus has now been found in more than 60 countries around the world. It's thought to be contributing to a number of hotspots around Asia, and of course in India it quickly became the primary variant of SARS-CoV-2. It's also now the dominant variant of coronavirus being found in the United Kingdom. And public health authorities there say there's early evidence that it could actually bring with it an increased risk of hospitalisation as well. The government there is worried that this strain could derail plans for them to lift lockdowns later this month.
The federal government has announced dedicated vaccination hubs for participants in the NDIS. Partnering with health and disability organisations, they're opening accessible centres for people who live in residential accommodation. It's a welcome move for the sector, which felt left behind in the rollout.
Look at those clouds.
28-year-old Ken is booked to get his first COVID vaccination on Tuesday. His parents spoke to the ABC 3 weeks ago, concerned he and 9 others living in a group home had been forgotten.
It's been 4 months in the waiting. We've had to fight every bit of the way to get here, and we're really pleased.
From next week, there will be dedicated vaccination hubs for participants in the National Disability Insurance Scheme and their carers.
One of the lessons for us, I think, is that providers are best placed because essentially we need a personalised plan for every one of those 27,000 residents, all of whom have different disabilities.
The Commonwealth is partnering with other organisations to get the disability community vaccinated. In Victoria last week, they opened a hub in Thomastown. From Tuesday, the government and provider Life Without Barriers will open another in Dandenong. They'll also set up 2 hubs in New South Wales, one in Newcastle and one on the Central Coast. In South Australia, Aspen Medical will open a facility in Medindie. In Western Australia, there will be one in Cannington.
The people that are not able to access the hubs that the general community are accessing, then we want to set up specific hubs that really are tailored to meet their needs. And the reason we know that is because we provide support to these people in our services already.
While the disability sector welcomes these dedicated hubs, there are still gaps. There's none in Queensland, Tasmania or the Northern Territory. The government says more hubs will be announced.
It will not be enough until every person with disability in Australia who wants to have the vaccine is able to get it. It won't be enough until every worker in the sector who wants the vaccine is able to get it.
Look at you.
In the last year, Ken's only been out of his home to visit family on Christmas Day. His parents hope when he's vaccinated, all their lives can return to something like normal. Naz Campanella, ABC News.
Aged care workers could soon be forced to be vaccinated for coronavirus to protect some of Australia's most vulnerable citizens. But the nation's leaders haven't agreed on just how to implement a compulsory system, asking health experts to advise how and when it could happen. It comes as a new purpose-built quarantine facility gets the green light. From Canberra, political reporter Matthew Doran.
At the height of the pandemic, Avalon Airport resembled a parking lot, and soon returning overseas travellers could also be stationed there.
We're going to get cracking and deliver this facility. This is a very, very good outcome.
Land near the airport, the likely location of a new $200 million, 500-bed dedicated quarantine facility, after the Prime Minister and acting Premier struck a deal on who'd foot the bill.
The Commonwealth Government will meet the capital costs of that. The Victorian Government will meet the operational costs.
This facility in Victoria may not be operational until 2022. That's simply not good enough.
Deliberations over its location and construction not quite as slow as the pace of the vaccine rollout. The Victorian coronavirus outbreak rekindling fears vulnerable aged care residents are at risk if their carers haven't got the shot, prompting a debate at National Cabinet over making it mandatory.
We agreed to an in-principle disposition.
State and territory governments want it to happen, but also want more advice from officials on how and when.
Make no mistake, we are leaning heavily into this.
The Chief Medical Officer wary mandating vaccinations could have unintended consequences for the aged care workforce, citing experience in WA, where state government rules forcing hotel quarantine security guards to get vaccinated led some to quit.
We don't want that to be an issue.
The issue here is not about compulsion. The issue here is aged care workers who are desperate to be vaccinated can't get access to the vaccine.
Australia's nearing another vaccine milestone of 5 million doses administered across the country. And from Tuesday, 40 to 49-year-olds, regardless of location, will also have access. The uptick in Australians already rolling up their sleeves attributed to lockdown shock.
It is unfortunate that complacency had to be shaken up a bit by a small outbreak in Victoria, but that's the silver lining in that cloud.
While it's probably fair to say some have been jolted into action by the Melbourne coronavirus cluster, it's rare to hear it expressed in such a way by senior public health officials. And after copping a week of sustained interrogation over their handling of the vaccine rollout, they'll no doubt be hoping this incident signals a shift in the broader public sentiment. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
Still to come on ABC News this evening, Rugby League immortal Bob Fulton farewelled at a state funeral in Sydney. Plus, an Australian company repurposes a Black Hawk helicopter from the US military to fight fires. New South Wales police have thwarted a conspiracy to import a record 3 tonnes of cocaine into the state. As part of the international operation, officers created a replica shipment of drugs to trick their suspects. 3 men are tonight behind bars.
This isn't cocaine, but police allege the person who came to collect it thought it was. Officers raided 6 houses across Sydney. They also arrested a man at this storage shed and at a nearby car park in the Hunter.
And charged them with conspiracy to supply a prohibited drug, being a 3-tonne shipment of cocaine bound for New South Wales.
Authorities became suspicious after one of the men gambled at Sydney's Star Casino.
We saw transactional amounts in excess of $100 million in 1 week of gambling.
The trail eventually led overseas to North and South America. Officials seized more than 1,700 kilograms of cocaine off the coasts of Colombia and Ecuador. Police made a replica of a shipment to catch their suspects in New South Wales.
It allowed us to replicate that shipment and then allow it to travel through to its destination in a storage facility in the Newcastle area.
The 3 men faced court in Sydney and Newcastle, where they were all refused bail. Karen Thomas, ABC News, Sydney.
The crisis that has engulfed New South Wales Labor has been resolved. The party has a new leader, Chris Minns. At a special caucus meeting, he was appointed unopposed after Michael Daly decided to bow out.
This was a moment for caucus to come together.
Great to see everybody. I really missed you all.
Weeks of uncertainty and animosity. And behind closed doors, Labor appointed a new leader.
Look, I'm very humbled to be elected leader of the Parliamentary Labor Party.
Chris Minns claimed the job unopposed. Michael Daly decided not to run when nominations officially opened.
Given that it was completely clear that Chris had majority caucus support, that it was wholeheartedly in the best interests of the party, that I not push this to a ballot.
That would have forced a drawn-out vote of branch members, and Michael Daly concedes that would have been damaging.
The way is clear now for the Labor Party to contest the local government elections in September as a united front, and also that it gives Anthony Albanese the best opportunity to become the next Prime Minister of Australia.
I'm pleased that it's been resolved. Chris Minns is a talented, visionary, dynamic person.
Jodie McKay was absent from the meeting. From afar, the former leader expressed that she will be supporting Chris Minns. But the party still has a rift to heal.
Look, I'm not saying it's magically fixed. I'm saying that there will be challenges ahead, but I know my colleagues. I know that they're focused on the future.
The challenge too is for the new leader to create a new agenda that resonates with voters.
I don't want to just play politics, I want to focus on policy. The areas that I'm very concerned about are cost of living, particularly for working families.
Chris Minns has wanted this job for years and has made enemies in his pursuit of the leadership. That makes the task of unifying the party even harder. But there'll also be enormous pressure on him to live up to his promise that he's the right person to improve Labor's fortunes.
I'm not resiling from the fact that getting the Labor Party in a position where we're competitive at the next election will be very difficult.
He says Labor's campaign for 2023 starts now.
Some of Australia's most powerful news outlets have been slugged with more than $1 million in fines for breaching a gag order during Cardinal George Pell's sex abuse trial. Cardinal George Pell had his child abuse convictions overturned by Australia's High Court last year and has always maintained his innocence. Today, Victoria's Supreme Court ordered a dozen news outlets to pay more than $1.1 million in fines after they pleaded guilty to being in contempt of court. The biggest penalties were reserved for the publisher of The Age. That was slugged $450,000, and news.com.au was fined $400,000. The news outlets were also ordered to pay $650,000 in legal fees. Environment groups are planning legal action against the operators of a stricken container ship that's at the centre of an unfolding marine disaster off Sri Lanka. Police have banned the captain and engineers from leaving the country as fears grow chemicals and an oil leak could devastate the island nation's famed beaches and marine life.
Seen from above, the smouldering remains of the MV Express Pearl. The Singapore-flagged ship started sinking after authorities extinguished a fire that raged for 12 days. Pollution seeps into the surrounding water. Attempts to tow the ship further away from the port in Colombo failed after the stern hit the seabed. The Sri Lankan Navy is now checking for an oil spill.
If there is an oil spill, we have different methods of dealing with it. Depending on the weather conditions, we are ready to face all possibilities.
Teams have already started a clean-up along pristine tourist beaches, where debris from the ship is washing up along the shoreline. But that's not the only potential environmental problem. The ship's manifesto revealed a long list of chemicals.
Copper slags, lead ingots, and nitric acid, and a lot of plastics and also the epoxy resins.
Ocean experts say it's an environmental catastrophe.
From a man-made disaster, this is the worst to hit Sri Lanka.
It's feared tons of tiny plastic pellets have been released into the environment, some already found along Sri Lanka's west coast beaches.
3 containers we know fell into the ocean, which contain what we call nurdles, which are small plastic pellets, which there were 78,000 kilograms, which equivalent to about 3 billion particles.
Fish, birds and other wildlife mistake them for food. The government banned fishing along about 80 kilometres of coastline. Local communities are finding fish stocks have already been hit.
Even 25 kilometres out, we didn't catch a single fish, not even a baby fish.
At the local fish markets, trade has come to a virtual standstill. Livelihoods at stake and the environmental impact immeasurable. Jenny Lavelle, ABC News.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hit back at a newly agreed coalition which could end his 12 years in power. Mr Netanyahu called on right-wing members of parliament to oppose the alliance. In his first comments since the coalition was announced, Mr Netanyahu criticised the group as left-wing and dangerous. The deal still has to go before the Israeli parliament and would see centrist Yair Lapid and his main coalition partner, far-right Naftali Bennett, take turns as leader. The White House has unveiled plans to share 25 million surplus COVID-19 vaccine doses with the world. It's the first batch of 80 million shots that President Joe Biden has promised to send abroad this month. 3/4 of those are to be donated through the COVAX program to Latin America, the Caribbean, South Asia and Africa. The remaining will be directed to help deal with virus surges in Mexico, South Korea and the Palestinian territories. Vaccine sharing will be top of the agenda at a G7 meeting in the UK later this month. The might of the US military is being brought into Australia's fire fronts. The first Australian-owned and operated Black Hawk helicopter has been turned into a firefighting machine ahead of the next bushfire season. It's been bought by an Adelaide company, hoping to pave the way for aerial firefighting operations nationwide.
From Afghanistan to the Adelaide Hills, this ex-US military Black Hawk helicopter has been turned into a highly efficient firefighting tool.
We were looking for something that carried a big load, it was fast and importantly was very quick to respond, and this ticks all the boxes.
Adelaide-based aviation company Aerotech has bought 2 and is spending millions turning them into water bombers.
They're a great aircraft, lots of power, very manoeuvrable, really fast, the amount of payload it can carry is quite surprising, and how nimble and quick it can stay with carrying that much.
It's this rapid deployment capability that will become a major asset during the bushfire season. Within just a couple of minutes, it's ready to take off and fill up with its next load of more than 4,000 litres.
Rather than being brought in from overseas on loan, the helicopters will remain in Australia all year round, in keeping with a recommendation from the Bushfire Royal Commission to have an Australian sovereign aerial fleet with large helicopters. They will be the first Black Hawks on the Australian Civil Aircraft Register.
Because there hasn't been this before, there's been a lot of hoops to jump through with licensing and requirements and who's qualified to do what and fly it. So it's been a process, certainly.
With night operation capabilities, it's hoped the Black Hawks could also be used for night bombing on fire grounds in the future. Candice Prosser, ABC News, Adelaide.
Scientists on board a CSIRO research vessel say the East Australian current is getting warmer and stronger, which is changing the distribution of marine species. The RV investigator has docked in Brisbane after a month-long voyage from Hobart.
It's been described as the scientific Swiss Army knife of ships, capable of conducting biological, oceanographic, geological and atmospheric research for 300 days a year. The 94-metre research vessel has just finished a 27-day voyage from Hobart to Brisbane. Its mission to gather data and research the wider impacts of a warmer and stronger East Australian current on marine life and the way our oceans work.
It's a super important current because it keeps the east coast of Australia warm and acts as a highway not just for heat but for fish.
The ship recovered and reset 6 moorings which have instruments to monitor salinity, flow rate and temperature. Scientists say it's getting warmer and is causing significant changes to biodiversity in southern waters, which are heating 3 to 4 times the global average. Most people know the East Australian current from the film Finding Nemo. Warming waters can impact rain events far into inland Australia and can cause significant long-term changes to biodiversity.
My colleague said that he thought he'd be a grandfather before he saw these changes, but they're happening right in front of our eyes. It's bringing tropical species that are generally plant eaters further south, and these species are eating down those precious marine environments and changing them.
Jellyfish populations and habitats, including slow-moving oceanic whirlpools, were also researched.
We've always been focusing on what the jellyfish eat, and there's been very little research done on what's actually eating the jellyfish. And what we're discovering is that the jellyfish are a really important food source for a lot of other animals.
And we always think of nursery grounds as being in seagrass beds and in mangroves, which they are. But we haven't really taken on board that offshore there are these nursery grounds for herring and mackerel and anchovy.
The RV investigator will leave Brisbane for Darwin next week. Baz Ruddick, ABC News, Brisbane.
Rugby league legend Bob Fulton has been remembered as a great player, coach and family man at a state funeral in Sydney. Bobby Fulton was one of the sport's 4 original immortals, the highest honour in the game. Hundreds of mourners filled St Mary's Cathedral to say goodbye to the Manly great, who died of cancer last month.
The rugby league world is grieving.
In my view, Bozo was the best.
A legend of the game, Bob Fulton was farewelled by friends, teammates and family.
Dad is my hero. He is my mentor and he's my best mate.
Well done, Bozo. You deserve as many of the accolades as the players do.
Affectionately known as Bozo, he achieved immortal status, an accolade few have reached.
And he won 3 premierships. He coached to win 2 premierships. Long after the scores are forgotten, the memories and the friendships live on.
The game's biggest names, spanning decades, shared memories of a dear friend.
He was a good person. He loved helping people. So, you know, whatever he done was for the betterment of everyone else.
Fans also said goodbye.
He was a legend for our club. He is Manly. He gave us his soul, his heart.
The New South Wales Blues and Manly Sea Eagles players made a guard of honour.
I went to Manly to win the comp. I ended up playing for my state in Australia under the guidance of Bozo, and he's going to be very missed.
The overwhelming turnout is testament to Bob Fulton's lasting legacy as a player, coach and an administrator. It's a time for mourning, but also an opportunity to celebrate the life of one of the game's greatest ever.
We should never forget Bob Fulton. Anyone that cares about rugby league will never ever forget Bob Fulton.
He's survived by his wife Anne, 3 children and grandchildren. Chloe Hart, ABC News, Sydney.
A portrait of a centenarian has taken out the 100th Archibald Prize. 6-time finalist Peter Wegner accepted his first win from lockdown in Melbourne.
Guy Warren at 100.
An apt win for a portrait of an Archibald alumnus, adept as painter, sitter and critic.
It's a good painting. It looks like me. I think I'm getting almost as much pleasure out of this as if I'd won the damn thing myself.
Melbourne-based winner Peter Wegner, a COVID absentee, accepting the award on screen. The figurative painter proving 6th time's the charm.
My wife actually cried, and it took a moment before I realised what had sunken in.
The two painters sat together at Warren's home in Sydney.
He had that pink jumper over his shoulders, and I just knew straight away that that's what I wanted to put in. It's quite a contemporary look. I liked that. I thought it was great.
It's a portrait of great empathy. He's looking at him with the respect that he has for him as a professional artist, but also his respect for him as a human being.
It's the first time there's been an equal number of male and female identifying finalists. It will exhibit from tomorrow alongside Archie 100, a retrospective of the prize.
It's arranged thematically, looking at different ways in which portraiture has evolved throughout the last 100 years and reflecting on how society in this country has changed over that period.
Time for reflection, and for Wegner,
Life will keep going. I won the Archibald, but I'm still in the studio tomorrow.
not time to rest on his laurels. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
To finance, the stock market closed at a record high despite a hit to commodities. Here's Daniel Ziffer.
The city that never sleeps has become the city that never goes to the office. We won't be able to check for ourselves for a while, but occupancy in New York's high-rise office towers is at just 17% as workers stay home and businesses change. These figures are from before Victoria's current lockdown, but the occupancy rates in the central business districts of Australia's big cities are much healthier, although still a long way from before 2020. The stock market has closed the week on a record high. Given we measure it in fractions of a point, this could keep happening for some time. Meanwhile, house prices are white hot. But will regulators step in to turn down the temperature? Loans for investors to buy houses jumped 2% in April after a rocket rise in March. Investors are currently around 25% of the market. But the last time the prudential regulator APRA stepped in to tighten restrictions on how and to whom banks could lend, that share was much higher. Gold was stable, but if you want to buy an ounce of it, you'll need more than 2,400 Australian dollars. Global markets were mixed as we head for the weekend, and the US economy's strength has trimmed what had been a solid rise in the value of our dollar against the greenback. And that's finance.
Time for a check of the weather now. Here's Graham Creed.
A high-pressure system is the dominant feature across most of the continent, and it will dominate the weather as we move through the weekend, but it will allow a couple of cold fronts to move through the south of the continent, and these are going to affect the far south of Western Australia, also into South Australia, Victoria, and widespread across Tasmania. But frost under that high is a dominant feature elsewhere, particularly through the southern inland of Queensland. We are expecting to see some frosty conditions. A cold morning also on the way for Brisbane. Should be a generally dry day. The only area looking at a possible shower is the far northern parts of the Cape. We've got mostly dry conditions in New South Wales, widespread frost through the southern half of the inland and ranges, although we're probably not going to see those reaching towards the coast. We are expecting to see frost across the north of Victoria, showers increasing in the south through the morning, and then they should reach through into central areas during the afternoon or evening. We've also got increasing showers in the morning through the west, and these will spread through to the east by the afternoon and then contract into the northeast as we move into tomorrow evening. Showers mostly about the southern districts of South Australia, a little bit more frequent about the Mount Lofty Ranges and the lower southeast. We're also looking at a few isolated showers about the southwest corner of Western Australia and parts of the south coast. This is just as a very weak front clips that region. And for the Northern Territory and northern Western Australia, clear, dry and sunny, but it is getting colder across southern parts of the Territory.
Here are the top stories on ABC News. Authorities are concerned about a new coronavirus variant which has been detected in Melbourne. Genomic sequencing identified the Indian Delta variant in 2 infections which are unrelated to all the other cases in Melbourne's current outbreak. In total, there have been 4 new cases today. The federal opposition says the government should focus on improving access to COVID-19 vaccines rather than making them mandatory for aged care workers. National Cabinet gave its in-principle agreement to making vaccinations compulsory for aged care staff, pending further health advice. Sri Lanka is preparing for the possibility of a massive oil spill from a burnt-out container ship that's sinking off its west coast. The vessel was carrying 20,000 containers of toxic chemicals. Response teams are now on standby as fears grow. Oil will also leak into the ocean. And Melbourne artist and 6-time finalist Peter Wegner has won the 2021 Archibald Prize with his portrait of Guy Warren. There were almost 1,000 entries, and for the first time in its 100th year, the award had an equal number of male and female finalists. The exhibition opens at the Art Gallery of New South Wales tomorrow. The Indian